It still makes me laugh how after all of the ridiculous things Indy has done, seen, and survived over the years, the fridge scene is where so many people draw the line. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the fourth film in the Indiana Jones franchise, the 2008 action-adventure sequel, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull stars Harrison Ford, Shia LaBeouf, and Cate Blanchett, and was directed by Steven Spielberg. Set in 1957, it tells the story of archaeologist Indiana Jones as he searches for a Mesoamerican artifact and some kidnapped friends in a race against time and the Soviets. Indiana Jones is a franchise that I've loved since I was a kid. I watched the original trilogy tons of times growing up, so I definitely have a nostalgic connection to the films, though I was never quite as obsessed with them as some people that I knew. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was released a little less than a year before I was born, so I never had the chance to see any of those original movies in the theater, and frankly, never expected that we would get any more movies in the franchise. So, when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, I jumped at the chance to see an indie movie on the big screen. It was exciting because I was a fan of the franchise already, but legacy sequels weren't quite as common back then, so it felt like a bit of a novelty too. It also felt like a bit of a risk, and maybe a bit of a trap, but it was also a bit of a return, not only to a decades-old franchise and character, but also to a style of film that had mostly disappeared at that point. So I don't usually like to tip my hand in my reviews. Typically, I let my overall discussion and criticism of a film sum up my thoughts before I get to a rating, but this is a movie where I feel the need to mix things up a bit. My thoughts on movies don't always perfectly align with common consensus. In fact, I think I at least slightly differ from the consensus more frequently than not. There are movies that I love that others hate, and movies I really dislike that are regarded as masterpieces, and that's fine. It's normal. It'd be weird and dishonest otherwise. But in almost every case, regardless of me being on the positive or negative end of the spectrum, I at least can understand the basis behind the consensus. Usually there's some sort of reasonable, logical explanation for the love or hate, even if I don't personally agree with it. But Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is one that I just don't get. I don't understand the widespread hatred for this film. It has its issues for sure, and it's not even a movie I love. I like it, but to me, it's definitely weaker than all of the films in the original trilogy. But the degree of animosity that so many people have for this film is just so bizarre to me. I think this is a very unfairly maligned movie. Like I said, I have criticisms. I have reasoning for why I think it's unfairly maligned, so hopefully you'll stick around to hear me out, even if you disagree. But I felt like I had to get this out on the forefront of the review. Legacy, or very delayed sequels, function a little differently than regular sequels. With movies that are only a few years apart, it's easy enough to simply continue a storyline. But when you've got a nearly 20-year gap between movies, especially in a franchise as character-centric as Indiana Jones, you can't just gloss over the time difference. Reasonably, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull takes the story into the future, or at least more into the future. The original trilogy was set between 1935 and 1938, whereas this film is set in 1957, perfectly matching the 19-year gap between film releases. This is obviously helpful when it comes to character and actor aging, but the 50s setting also allows us to see Indy facing slightly different challenges. In the 30s, Nazis and the threat of impending war were at the forefront of people's minds, so naturally, 2 of the 3 original films focused on that. In the 50s, there was a different set of concerns fueling the zeitgeist of the era. The Cold War and the Soviets, the Red Scare and McCarthyism, the atomic age, aliens and UFO sightings, all combining to create this paranoia and fear of the unknown, especially of an unknown future. The individual components are different, but those themes, those ideas, those concepts are very much in line with what Indy had been facing 2 decades before. So the time period actually works well for an Indiana Jones movie. In fact, despite the 19 years and changed plot pieces, this still feels like a classic Indiana Jones movie. It's glossier and has CGI, which I'll get into in a bit, but the core of this film is still the same. Once again, we've got a fun and, at times, silly adventure where Indiana Jones is in search of some sort of religious relic, whose legend he's initially skeptical of. It's got the global threat race against time element and some familiar faces from Raiders of the Lost Ark, the non-Christian relic and lack of Nazis from Temple of Doom, and the rescue mission and strong family elements from Last Crusade. Indiana Jones himself is still very much the same type of character. The movie retains the classic Indiana Jones tone, balancing adventure, humor, and fun. There's puzzle solving, enjoyable action sequences, it's got an over-the-top, campy villain, and gets extremely silly at times, like all of them have. It also has that same classic Spielbergian feel and direction to it. By all accounts, it's just another Indiana Jones adventure, in the same vein as the original trilogy. So, that brings us back to the question of why all the hatred for this film? As I said before, this movie does have some problems. There's some story issues, and underutilization of certain characters, which is kind of unfortunate. I think Indy is as good as ever here, and I actually really like the character of Mutt Williams, and think the two of them have pretty good chemistry throughout the story. But characters like Marion and Oxley have frustratingly little to do. This movie also loses the grit of the original trilogy, taking on a much more polished look. Whereas the older films had a certain sweaty roughness to them, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is about as sleek looking as you can get with an adventure film. Much of this is due to the use, and perhaps overuse, of CGI. The original films were a practical effects delight, sometimes goofy, but charming and tangible. This film still has a lot of practical effects, so that's not entirely lost, but most of the action sequences are enhanced or extended with CG. It wasn't quite as blatant back in 2008, but the technology is noticeably dated now. Not horrendous looking, but noticeable enough to pull you out at times, mostly during the jungle jeep chase and the finale. The things I just mentioned are all reasonable issues to have with this film, and criticisms that I share in, or partly share in. However, detractors of this film tend to hone in on those problems only when pressed on the matter, instead taking issue with the film's central conceit. This is something I can't get into without mentioning a sort of spoiler. The movie blatantly and openly hints at this idea within the first 5 or 10 minutes, but if you haven't seen the film, don't know anything about it, and don't want to know something, then just skip ahead a little bit. Okay, we good? Are we safe? Aliens. Or interdimensional beings, as Oxley corrects, but who are we kidding? It's aliens. Now, I understand the initial gut reaction to this. An Indiana Jones movie with aliens? What? Because when we think of Indiana Jones, or at least when I do, I picture him running from that boulder, or swinging across some crevice with his whip. Action adventure and puzzle solving and something sort of grounded comes to mind. And thinking that that could ever be combined with aliens just sounds ridiculous. But when you take a second to stop and actually think about these movies, it doesn't sound so ridiculous anymore. Each of the Indiana Jones movies involve the search for some sort of relic. But these relics weren't ever Indiana Jones creations. The Ark of the Covenant was a thing before Raiders ever came out. The Shiva Lingam that inspired the Shankara stones existed before Temple of Doom. The story of the Holy Grail predates 1989 and the Last Crusade. And even the concept of supernatural, paranormal, Mesoamerican crystal skulls was around long before this movie. This franchise takes myths and legends and stories that already exist and incorporates them into pulpy adventure plots. But from the very beginning, this has always been done in a fantastical science fiction way. So how can we scoff at aliens? How is that any more absurd than a box that melts Nazi faces, or stones that let someone rip people's hearts out when they're still alive, or a cup that grants eternal life? It's all absurd. It's all supernatural fantasy and sci-fi, and it always has been since Raiders. This film takes a slightly different direction with the sci-fi, but it's not as big or outlandish of a departure as many would have you believe. And honestly, the same thing goes for some of the more ridiculous and silly moments in the film. I'll give you the vine swinging scene, but I can't give you the fridge scene. I'm sorry, but I can't. Yes, it's ridiculous. Yes, it's goofy and plays up the humor. Yes, the actual chance of survival would be pretty slim. But have you watched the other three movies? They all have ridiculous, goofy, unlikely moments like that. I mean, come on. Indy jumps out of a plane, inflates a raft as he's falling, somehow lands this raft on a snowy mountain and toboggans down through a forest, only to careen hundreds of feet off a cliff into whitewater rapids. And yet, the fridge. No way. That's where we draw the line. I mean, come on. It's okay if that kind of silly absurdity isn't your thing. And it's okay if you don't like this movie. But I just don't understand the widespread assertion that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull sucks, because it has these silly moments and a sci-fi premise. While in the very same breath, most people praise the original movies for those exact same things. Again, I just don't understand what it is about this movie for people. It just doesn't compute. Doesn't make sense. But whatever. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. Bandwagons are powerful things. It's an interesting phenomenon with this film. But this is the same old Indy. A little gray hair, an alien, and a polished sheen doesn't change that. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is Indiana Jones, the character. It had been nearly 20 years since the last film, but this is the same old Indy. Harrison Ford plays this character just as comfortably as he always did, and it's so much fun. It's this nostalgic return that just feels right, because he picks up exactly as you would expect him to. He's older, but other than a couple of jokes, his age doesn't really slow him down at all, and he's his usual adventurous, funny, and charming self. He's also got great chemistry with a few other characters. His interactions with Marion are somewhat limited, but enjoyable as always, but where he really shines is in his interactions with Mutt. They've got surprisingly great chemistry, and it's fun to see him take on aspects of the Sean Connery role from Last Crusade. The second pro is the tone. This is something I've enjoyed in all of the Indiana Jones movies, so it's nice to see that it was something they managed to retain in a delayed legacy sequel like this. It has a bit more of a nostalgic looking back quality to it than the other films, which is understandable, and some of the humor was perhaps a bit more lighthearted, but it was still a wonderful balance. Adventure, mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, all presented in a boundingly fun way that was more than a little reminiscent of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. On the con side, the biggest issue is the CGI. I will say that the visual effects have long been a source of iffiness in the franchise. The practical effects, great, but the special effects, So this is just a slightly more advanced digital version of that same problem. It's not that the CGI looks bad, it's just very noticeable. I don't remember it really standing out to me when I saw this in theaters, so I think this is mostly just an issue of dated technology. Some of it's unnecessary, like the prairie dog and the monkeys, while other moments just take the CGI glossiness too far and cover up actual practical effects, like in the case of the jungle chase. The second con is related to the story, and it's the use of certain characters. So my problem here is kind of two-part. First, there are certain characters that are just really underutilized. It's exciting to have Marion back, and she does have a role in the story and some things to do, but not nearly enough. Likewise, Oxley is basically a waste of a character, which is unfortunate, because he could have had real importance to the story and character development of other characters. And then we've got part 2 of my problem here, which basically just boils down to Mac. Again, there was potential for something interesting with him, but the way they wrote this character and his arc is just so frustrating and sloppy. It's too inconsistent, so you end up simply ignoring him and not caring about the character at all. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, or any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them, if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull 3.5 out of 5 paws. It's such an unfairly maligned installment in this fun, pulpy adventure franchise. The production's a little sleeker, the hair's a little grayer, there's a bit too much reliance on CGI, but it's the same old Indy, an exciting and silly adventure centered around a religious relic. I would recommend Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to people looking for a fun legacy adventure sequel. This is a tough one to really nail down for recommendations, because it's a film that's bizarrely hyper-polarizing. Existing fans of Indiana Jones should get the most out of this, because of existing connections to the characters, the references, and just general nostalgia. And I know many fans who do like it, myself included, but I also know a lot of indie fans who despise this film, so it's hard to make a broad recommendation statement. I guess basically, if you want a throwback adventure film in the vein of classic Indiana Jones, complete with the moments of goofy humor and silly sci-fi elements that have always been present in the series, then this fourth film will likely be entertaining to you as well. If you liked Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I would recommend Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I've obviously got to recommend at least one other movie from this franchise, and this is the one that has the most similar story structure and character dynamics, especially as they relate to family. If you liked the adventure and want another treasure hunting film, you might want to check out Treasure Island. There are a lot of film versions, ranging from 1930 Swashbuckler to Muppet, but I'd suggest Disney's 1950 live-action version. There's adventure, a mentor-type relationship, and Ben Gunn is an awful lot like Oxley. And if you'd like another recent adventure film with sci-fi fantasy elements, you should watch Jungle Cruise. Dwayne Johnson is no Indiana Jones, but he's still a charming and funny lead in this CGI-heavy adventure full of one-liners and ancient curses. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie featuring an actor returning to a role after 15 or more years? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.